the creation of a global representative system of marine protected areas and through the management in accordance with the principles of the World Conservation Strategy. In this talk, I discuss these lessons in relation to attainment of this goal, which has determined all the strategies that my colleagues and I have adopted within the work plan of the World Commission on Protected Areas over the many years. So I'll be giving you several lessons which shine out from the experience of those of us who have been working on establishing and managing MPAs over the past 3 decades. Those that follow appear to me to be universal in their applicability. Now, it's not easy to apply these. It's very stressful. As you can see, I'm only 34 and look what it's done to me. This is the first lesson. Before an MPA is established, its general and specific objectives should be clearly defined. The physical, chemical, biological, social and economic attributes that define those objectives should be identified, and a monitoring program should be carried out that measures those attributes as a foundation against which to measure later changes. Management should be adaptive, meaning that it is periodically reviewed and revised as dictated by the results of monitoring. Modern management recognises that it is not possible to assess performance without identifying measurable objectives and overtly measuring the attainment or failure of reaching those objectives. The second lesson is socio-economic issues are critical. They often determine the success or failure of MPAs. These considerations should be addressed from the outset. The third lesson is time spent in preparation is an essential investment that will be repaid many times over. Proponents of MPAs have to show demonstrable benefits for stakeholders, and this takes time and diplomacy. To date, there seems to be some scepticism about the benefits of MPAs in various circles. However, the data, the amount of information that is available on the success of MPAs when properly administered is dramatic. So never assume people are aware of these examples. You have to give them data. The fourth, and perhaps the most important lesson, is that local people must be deeply involved from the earliest possible stages in any MPA that is to succeed. This involvement should extend to them receiving clearly identifiable benefits from the MPA. Lack of participation by local people is the most common cause of failure, for no government can manage effectively an MPA without community support. Effective participation calls for restraint on the part of MPA managers, who must ensure that the local communities intellectually and emotionally own the MPA. 5. The most important attribute of an MPA manager is integrity. Many managers have made the mistake of believing that they can fool some of the people some or all of the time. The consequence of this is that the manager appears to win a series of battles, but he or she loses the war because of the accumulation of enemies and loss of trust. This, of course, eventually leads to failure. 6th, design and management of MPAs must be both bottom-up and top-down. A common feature of Western thought, which many Asians find amusing, is our either-or mentality. This is demonstrated, perhaps most directly, in the adversarial legal systems which prevail in many Western countries, and by the tendency to think in black and white terms. The debate about the relative merits of top-down and bottom-up approaches exemplifies this problem. Except in effective dictatorships, which don't occur, of course, in the democratic world, those dictatorships in the democratic world are ineffective. Pure top-down methods will never work. Equally, attempts by local communities to establish protective measures without the support of appropriate levels of government will often or usually end in their rules being broken by outsiders. Therefore, in developing MPAs, it is necessary to obtain the formal support of both local communities and government. 7. Sustainable financing needs to be built in from the very beginning. In many countries, government budgets for conservation are declining and are, under present conditions, are likely to continue to decline. Protected area managers are having to be increasingly creative in finding ways of paying for protected areas once the initial grants and aid support run out. Alternative income generating activities should be planned from the very beginning, should be started not just when the grants run out. 8. Almost all MPAs contribute to sustainable fisheries because they invariably contribute to maintenance or restitution of both biological diversity and biological productivity. One of the problems commonly encountered setting up MPAs is conflict between those who wish them to be established purely for the sake of biological diversity and those who emphasise their contribution mainly to human welfare, that is, fisheries. This conflict is unnecessary and destructive. 9. There has been a long history in almost all areas of the world of conflict and lack of cooperation between environmental and fisheries management agencies. This lack of joint action inhibits progress in establishing MPAs and managing them wherever it is manifest. Individual MPAs and systems plans should be designed to serve both sustainable use and environmental protection objectives, and relevant agencies should work together in planning and management. An alternative project to having competing management agencies, and which avoids this conflict, is to have a primary agency or statutory authority that has the power and motivation to ensure cooperation in avoiding this unnecessary and destructive conflict. 10. It is better to have an MPA that meets the primary goal, but which is not ideal in an ecological sense, than to strive vainly to create the perfect MPA. We have all seen the dedicated scientists and others spending their lives attempting to convince governments to establish MPAs in areas which are ideal from the viewpoint of ecological diversity, but which are not feasible from a socio-economic viewpoint. 11. It is usually a mistake to postpone action on the establishment of an MPA because biophysical information is incomplete. There is usually sufficient existing information to justify the MPA. The involvement of local users contributes to this dramatically. 12. There is a global debate about the relative merits of small, highly protected MPAs or reserves and large multiple-use MPAs. This dispute is unnecessary because actually they're the same. It is a highly protected zone or area within a ecologically sustainable management area. Applies to both of them. 13. An MPA will rarely succeed unless it is embedded in or is so large that it constitutes an integrated ecosystem management system covering a whole ecosystem, So what I just said applies either method. A series of interconnected reserves in a general management area or large zoned MPA. 14, in the last lesson, learning by doing is often the most efficient way for communities to develop expertise. It is much better and more effective than the alternative. My conclusion, and our conclusion from all of these case studies, is that success or failure is not usually determined by complex factors unique to that particular MPA. On the contrary, they result from failure to apply these fairly simple strategic principles. And it is often the socio-economic rather than the biological factors that determine success or failure. Decades of experience has shown that there are strategic principles which are applicable nearly everywhere. However, at the detailed technical level, the approaches have to differ. They have to be appropriate to the area. Remember the old dictum, when in Rome, do as Rome does. Follow that dictum, provided that it does not include and involve corruption, because as you know, in many countries, corruption is normal. Never adopt that or you will fail. Now, I didn't tell you this at the start, but an expanded version of this paper is available from Wildaid. I didn't tell you because otherwise you wouldn't have listened.